You can't help noticing Will Wright is having a blast.
Oh no!
The co-founder of Maxis Software, he's the genius behind SimCity, the best-selling computer game that made urban planning, well, interesting. SimCity puts you in the role of a city planner, building schools, roads and sewage systems.
Will, I think, is remarkable in that he's looked to reality for his inspiration, as opposed to the various fantasy worlds.
Meet the Sims. They're your responsibility now. In Will's latest game, you're put in the scary position of finding happiness for your own virtual family by building them a house and buying them things. Like elaborate humanoid Tamagotchis, your Sims will need a lot of TLC.
We sort of settled on this kind of expensive dollhouse, but not a dollhouse, kind of look. Little miniatures, realistic lighting, realistic materials. The characters had to have a lot of realistic motions and gestures.
Teach them how to cook or they'll burn the house down. Keep them entertained and employed or they'll get depressed. Oh, and try to get on with the neighbors. For Will Wright, work is play.
So a good bit of it is understanding what people enjoy.
Yes.
And so, I mean, in fact, I spend a lot of time playing computer games just because I want to find out why I enjoy certain activities in a game or don't enjoy them.
When Will was growing up in Georgia, he built model ships and airplanes. He's still building, but on a grander scale.
When Will Wright first tried to pitch the concept for the game SimCity, people asked him, where's the game in all this? SimCity was the highest grossing game in 1999. Will Wright, great to have you on Big Thinkers.
Oh, thank you.
Now let's talk about the concept behind this. You've called it a strategy for life. What exactly was the idea behind this?
Well, I wanted to have kind of a toy of sorts that people could play with and also be creative. A lot of games, you're forced to go down this certain path, and, basically the game designer puts traps or puzzles for you to solve. And something like SimCity, though, it's much more like a construction set or a train set where it's up to you to be creative. And it's kind of interesting because we don't have a very structured goal in the game. We don't say that the biggest city wins or the happiest residents win. What we let the player do is they sit down and they have to decide when they start playing the game, what is my ultimate city? What to me is my vision of utopia? And then they're challenged to create that in the game.
How did you come up with it? I know that you did a year of studying architecture and psychology too, right?
The Sims actually had more of a basis in architecture. And I wanted to do a game where you were creating a house. And then as I went down the path, trying to figure out how to make architecture fun, it became apparent that I needed to simulate people living in the house to kind of score how good your house was when you designed it. So we went down this path of studying psychology and putting some artificial intelligence into the people and developing this very robust behavioral engine. And pretty soon it just got so fun and compelling to be controlling these little characters in their lives that they kind of took over the game. They became the focus of it.
Let's take a video mail question. We've asked people to send in video mail questions for Will Wright. And if you want to ask any of our upcoming guests a question, go to zdtv.com/bigthinkers. This one comes from Greg from Burlington, Vermont. Greg likes to play The Sims, but he's wondering if other people would take umbrage at some of the elements of the game.
Hi, Will. One of the things I noticed in The Sims was that it allows homosexuality and polygamy to be a valid part of playing the game. And I was wondering if you were afraid that opponents of computer entertainment in general will use The Sims as an example of something that's corrupting our society.
Well, you guys at Maxis are really progressive.
Yeah. Well, the polygamy actually was more of a technical issue. The Sims doesn't actually consider marriage as a state. It's an event. So, two people, a man and a woman, can get married, and then they move in. And at that point, it doesn't worry about what the relationship is. The homosexuality was somewhat of a different issue. One of the things I really wanted in this game was that anybody should be able to put in whatever family they came from, whatever family structure. I didn't want to, make any kind of judgments about, oh, that's not appropriate, for our game in that regard. So the way we tune the game is that if you actually push the characters towards a homosexual relationship, you can get them there. It's a little bit harder, but they won't do it autonomously.
Were you making any social statements, though? Because one of the interesting things about the game is the way to make your characters happy is to buy them stuff.
Uh-huh.
What's the motivation behind that? I mean, what's the thought put into that?
Well, actually, in most cases like that, what I try to do is not to be judgmental in a moralistic plane. What I'd rather do is balance it as close to neutral as I can, so that half the people that play the game think that, oh, you're way too liberal, and the other half think, oh, you're too conservative. And then what happens is you have all these people discussing the issue and kind of saying, well, I think it's too liberal because of this, that, and the other. And really sparking the discussion between the players, to me, is my role.
Will's latest game is called The Sims, and it lets you play God over a neighborhood of little people. You can run their lives, and if you're not careful, ruin their lives. Who could have guessed urban planning could have been so addictive? But let's talk about the genres. This is a brand new genre of gaming. Do you think the present genres are played out?
Well, I think right now computer games are very specific on a very small number of topics. And I think there's just a tremendous amount of space out there that's unexplored. You know, because of the distribution system, a lot of other things, people are afraid to put a lot of money behind, you know, totally new ideas. And so every now and then, a title takes a risk and then does well, and then all of a sudden you have a lot of other people coming into that space. I wish that would happen more often.
Crystal ball gaze for me. What kind of games could come out of this concept?
To me, the most interesting thing is the fact that all of a sudden we take the kind of burden of storytelling off the game designer and place it on the player, and then the player, you know, feels much more creative with these things, and also has a lot more empathy. You know, because the more creativity you can put into something like that, the more you care about it, and the more you want to show your friends and look at what I made. It's more look at what I've made, as opposed to look at what I did.
Now, if you could make any game without limitations, what would you produce? Without any limitations?
Ooh, that's hard to say. I mean, I think there's certain areas of technology that I would like to explore, and I'm not sure what would come out of that exploration.
Like what? Artificial intelligence or something like that?
Well, actually, I think more importantly would be adaptive intelligence, adaptive computing, where the game could actually measure what I'm doing, look at what I'm enjoying, what I'm not enjoying, and then reprogram itself around my activities. So I might get this game, and the longer I play it, it's basically rewriting itself around what I like to do. And so you might get the same game, and after a month of play, your game and my game are totally separate. You know, we're doing totally separate activities, totally separate settings.
That would be good.
Yeah, and you know, so in that case, it's more like having a, you know, it's like when you're a kid and you have, you know, a really good friend that you like to play with, and together you build these shared imaginative worlds and these activities you go and do together. You know, I think the computer could do that to some degree in the future.
Let's take an email question. This is one that we were sent in to us. And also, you can send your questions by going to our website at zdtv.com/bigthinkers. This one's from Carmel, who lives in Portland, Oregon. She writes, what were your greatest influences when creating your first computer game?
Ooh, my biggest influences. My first computer game was actually pretty stupid. It was a fly around, blow up everything in sight. You know, at that point, I was more, I'd say, inspired by just the idea of creating a world. I'd actually been building robots before that. That's what got me into computers. And yeah, as a kid, I built models all the time.
And you still do that with Robot Wars together with your daughter, right?
Yeah, I still do that.
Robots, yeah.
It's actually very satisfying to build something out of matter occasionally instead of information. But so for me, I was always, as a kid, making models. I loved making models all the time. So when I got my first PC, it was just the idea that I could build worlds. You know, it was a new type of modeling, except rather than these static, lifeless models, I could build these dynamic models that actually had rules and physics. You know, it was a whole different level of modeling. So for me, that was the one thing that really sucked me into computers.
And coming forward to The Sims, I was playing the game just yesterday, and I was thinking, well, one of your biggest challenges, I'm sure, when you were making the game was to make these people in the game act plausibly, I guess.
Yeah.
Whatever they do, it's got to make sense. It's got to be like it is in the real world, right?
Yeah, one of the big issues with something like that, when you're dealing with human behavior, the weakest link in the chain can break it. And so we're propping up the solution on the screen that these little people actually are real and exist inside your computer. And all it takes is one, you know, really stupid thing, like having them hover off the floor or walk through a piece of furniture, and it totally shatters that illusion. So, you know, the real key to that, though, was figuring out what level to simulate human interaction. Obviously, we could not simulate people down to every level of detail. So the language, for instance, you don't actually hear the words when they're talking. You hear this kind of a Charlie Brown speak, kind of
I thought that was a bit of genius, actually.
But it worked very well because it actually gives you a lot of emotional tone and a lot of the communication. When you're reading these characters, it's mostly nonverbal. You're reading their body language, you're reading their tone of voice.
Waving their arms.
Yeah, and sometimes you'll see a little balloon above their head, you know, showing what topic they're discussing. So in some sense, it was almost like what I call human flocking behavior. It's as if though you were standing in a building looking down on the street. and watching people. And you can actually intuit a lot of what these people are doing and saying to each other just by their body language, even though you can't hear what they're saying. And so that's roughly the level that we decided to simulate these people at. So really it was a matter of how abstract. We kind of stepped back a little bit, took a slight abstraction of the humans, and we were able to create much more plausible behavior than if you were right there hearing every word.
Okay, I want to take a commercial, but after the break, two gaming insiders will join the mix. There's a lot more good stuff ahead. Stay around. Will Wright. We've also invited to the party the ever-affable Adam Sessler, host of ZDTV's GameSpot TV, and a newcomer to the show, Jeff Keighley, editor-in-chief of GameSlice.com. Glad to have you both on board, gentlemen. Let's begin with Adam. Adam, you have a question about the social implications of SimCity and The Sims.
Well, it's also the idea that SimCity and definitely in The Sims, you see the way that it has like a satirical edge, and it's making some degree of a social commentary, even if it's just sort of our fixation with trying to categorize people with certain qualities all the time. And it does have something that lasts sort of beyond just the satisfaction of playing the game. It has some sort of substance. Do you see the potential for other games to also go after almost more of sort of an artistic status in that manner?
Yeah, I tend to think of it more in terms of games having just relevance to your life. You see that in most other media, really good movies, books, even some of the better television, usually has some impact on your life. It changes the way you view the world. And so I think games are an incredibly powerful medium for doing this, much more so than these other media. So it surprised me that we haven't seen more of that. But, the most powerful thing I've seen is when people play certain games and then they walk away from the game. It's after they've stopped playing the games, they walk away and all of a sudden they view their world in a slightly different light, or they start thinking about new concepts that maybe they didn't tune into before because they're outside of, like in SimCity, certain things occur over decades, in city development. And when you're living in a city, it's like the same static environment every day. You don't actually see how organic this thing is, the way it moves around and develops. But in a game, you can see that, and so then you walk outside into your real city, and you see the same city with new eyes. And so, yeah, I think that's something we're going to see a lot more of.
What don't you like about gaming, though? I mean, what would you like to see improved about computer gaming?
Well, the main thing I would like to see is I would like to see a bigger variety of games. When I first started playing computer games back in the early 80s, I remember every new game that came out was like a whole new genre. And each one was like a brand new activity. And so even the ones that weren't that good were at least interesting. And over time, they got kind of more and more specific, and there were the first-person shooters and the RPGs and all that. So, I just wish I had, as a consumer, a broader choice.
And kind of leading off that point, Will, we see so many games that are really derivatives of a few key genres now. And you're doing something that is, in a completely new genre. How do you think the industry can foster that kind of creativity that you're showing in a game like The Sims? How can we move away from doing just first-person shooters?
Well, I think, people take risks, and, there's that old saying that pioneers are the ones with the arrows in their backs. And, in the games industry, it's as true as anything else. There have been a lot of creative things that just, with a game, it's not just the idea. Really, the idea is 10% of it, coming up with a creative idea about something new to do. It's that 90% follow-through that's hard. So generally, you'll get these small developers, and they're the ones willing to take a risk, but they don't have the resources to put a huge, multi-year development effort behind it to come out with something that's just, in some sense, you have to rise above the noise level, not just with the concept, but if you're going for a totally different concept, you almost have to have it more polished than some of the other ones, because it's like a double sell. I'm selling you on a whole new activity, but when you play it, it's going to be kind of you're in a new space. You know how to play a first-person shooter. You can sit down and you instantly know the kind of interface conventions. When you're in a totally different space like that, the learning curve is double of what it would be.
I've noticed from the people that I've spoken to who love the game, many of them are women, which is kind of unusual. I took the game back home to my wife, and it was one of the few games she'd ever been interested in. Women love The Sims. I mean, they're interested in that. What will happen in terms of getting new audiences, new markets that way?
Well, as far as women, we're actually hearing that a lot from The Sims. I mean, a surprising amount where people say, oh, I brought this home, and this is the first game my girlfriend ever wanted to play, and now I can't get it off the computer. I'm hearing that so much, it's amazing. In some sense, women are like the holy grail for the gaming industry. Been talked about for years is that basically half of the audience, the potential audience out there, is not buying our product. If we can get them to buy our product, that's double the market. But there's also this kind of critical mass thing where if you never buy computer games, you don't even think about going to a software store. They just, it's not part of their world. So right now, it's coming in through their significant other, or their boyfriend, or their husband, or whatever, and they're exposed to it. It's not like turning on the television where you can channel surf and all of a sudden a game falls onto your computer. So, but I think more and more it's going to be a generational thing. Like I have a 13-year-old daughter, and she's played games her whole life, and so do all of her friends. And so I think, as they grow up, the next generation, you're going to see a lot more gender equality in games. Right now, we're in this kind of this interesting crossover where I think women are entering the gaming industry just amazingly fast right now over the last few years compared to about 10 years ago.
It must have been a very brave decision to launch a computer game based on town planning. And that's exactly what Maxis did 10 years ago with SimCity. SimCity became one of the longest-running hits in computer gaming. Today's big thinker is Will Wright, creator of SimCity and the co-founder of Maxis. Will's latest game is called The Sims. It lets you build a virtual neighborhood and lord over the lives of little people in it. Also with us are ZDTV's Adam Sessler, host of GameSpot TV, and Jeff Keighley of GameSlice.com. Now, Jeff, you've got a question, right?
Right, well, I wanted to ask Will about the kind of online component of The Sims, because we've talked a lot about the single-player playing-at-home aspect, but there seems to be such extendability in terms of what you can do online with telling stories and things like that, and with people, the ideas of creating objects and creating characters such as Homer Simpson and Tony Soprano running around in your world. Do you see, what do you see as the implications of this online component? And do you think, there's going to be a time period in the future where people are actually going to be able to make money off, creating objects and things like that for the game?
I think, I would view this whole thing more as like a hobby. A lot of games are more like a movie where there's a beginning, middle, and end. Right. The characters that are developed by the designers. If you think about this more as a train set, hobbies, what they do is they foster these very interested communities. Mm-hmm. And so you have certain people, like with a train set, people can come in, certain people get into the scenery and they like to have perfect mountains. Other people like the trains and the switching. Other people like to build a little village. With something like The Sims, we tried to make every part of the game that we could open-ended and customizable by the user. So if you want to, you can redraw characters and put in your favorite people from TV or whatever. You can possibly design new objects. You can drop in your own MP3 and put your own music on the stereo. And so we're already fostering a lot of people that are, very interested in creating more content, being very creative with the game. So there's like a meta level of creativity. You can be creative within the game, but there's still a level of creativity even above that. And so you've also got this hierarchy where you have like 5% of the players that do really cool things that the other 95% will download and appreciate. And so you give people kind of a platform to showcase their talents.
Also, when you see all the enthusiasm that's around The Sims, and you look at, say, the wild success of Railroad Tycoon last year, and also like EverQuest, which to a lesser extent does offer sort of an open-ended, persistent world type of experience, are we looking at sort of like a thirst and a hunger by a lot of gamers out there for an experience that is different than just the linear story that the gaming industry just wasn't giving them enough of?
Well, all these games you mentioned, are not really story-based. Again, it's the player coming up with the story.
But have they wanted that? Like, has that been absent so long in the gaming world that that's what people really do want to be playing and they haven't had access to it?
I think it's a matter of they want to be telling the story. They enjoy a good story, but really, if you look at it, books and movies are much better springboards for a linear story than games. Games, I think, are going to slowly turn out to be the ultimate place where the customer is creating the story. And so a lot of the things we're doing with the online is allowing people to very easily create the story as they play and then share it with other people. So even people without the game can go read the photo albums of what happened to the twisted family you created in The Sims. And they might learn about the game. They might see new possibilities that they can then use in their stories. And so I think people as storytellers, it used to be a very common thing for people to know how to tell a story around a campfire. That was our history, was just told through the oral tradition. And now it's gotten so specialized that, we pay writers and whatnot to tell us stories, but we don't think of ourselves as telling, we'll tell stories, at the bar or at our friend's house. We don't really think of it that much, though. But I think we have kind of this innate desire to create stories and communicate them.
I must say there's an opportunity to really get some stress relief from this, that you can do cruel and terrible things to your inhabitants. I know this guy, this mild-mannered fellow over here, has some wonderful ways of making his poor Sims suffer. What's your favorite cruel way of treating your Sims?
Well, what I like to do is I like to be subversive with the game. Even as a designer, I like to try to figure out things that the designer didn't think about and then push the game in that direction, which is kind of the schizophrenic thing. But, so I'll build a Pac-Man maze and try to redo Pac-Man. I'll put people in the pool, take away the ladders so they can't get out, and then I'll put two women in there that are madly in love with this guy, And so they're swimming around the pool trying to catch them. And all I can do is drive the guy, and if they catch me, I lose. And it replicates Pac-Man, because I even do the pool in like a Pac-Man maze shape. And, you know, for me, it was just kind of cool that I could do something that weird with the game that was not designed for that at all, you know. So I'm always just kind of pushing on all the boundaries, saying, how far can I push it in this direction, this direction?
It boggles the mind. Anyway, that's it for this show. It's been great talking to Will Wright, creator of SimCity and The Sims, and a big thanks to our panelists, Adam Sessler and Jeff Keighley. Have you been to our website yet? It's at zdtv.com/bigthinkers. Send in questions and comments for some of the world's most thought-provoking people, and we'll do our best to ask them on air. I'm Mark Eddo. We'll be back next week with another Big Thinker. Thanks for watching.